Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And the official 11.0.2 patch notes have just debuted from Blizzard for the release for the expansion for The War Within. A significant amount of these changes I have already covered in previous videos that I will have linked at the end of this. However, there are quite a few that are new on this list that are really going to be taking this game in an interesting direction, as well as a huge amount of PvP specific adjustments, something that we haven't seen, and also I wasn't expecting to see until maybe like a week or two into the actual release of the expansion. But there are other changes that will obviously affect the game as a whole. A lot of the changes to Death Knight were changes that we've already seen and I have already covered. I will say though, they have updated a lot of abilities that were previously not nerfed, which were percentage based healing abilities or self-healing abilities on a lot of classes have been reduced. Originally it was mostly like Affliction Warlock had like the big first taste of that reduction with Drain Life healing reductions, but now they're applying that to a lot of other classes. So you're going to see that I think self-healing is going to be significantly lower as a result of a lot of these changes that they've done specifically to all of the classes, but pretty much everything else we've already covered in previous videos that I will have linked to. When we get down closer to something like Rogue though, I noticed some changes that I think are new, or maybe it's because we were reading the patch notes that were really difficult to read. You can see things like maximum health of healing elixirs reduced from 15 to 10. I'll also have this linked if you want to see specifically all of these changes for your class if you didn't see the previous videos, to see them specifically for yourself. But you'll notice the healers also got a lot of buffs. So the Resto Druid buffs, so the Mystery buffs that I've just scrolled past. Unless you're a Holy Paladin, then obviously you're not getting buffed. They hate you. I don't know. They want the Holy Paladins to get put in line. Obviously, you guys are performing really well in the beta, at least in PvE, but you're going to feel a bit of that pain in PvP as a result of taking those PvE-specific nerfs. But I think it's mostly Rogue. We specifically saw big changes to their crowd control abilities like Kidney Shot and Gouge, but we are now seeing significant nerfs to their self-healing as well, with Cloaked in Shadows Absorb going to 18 down from 30, Soothing Darkness 15 down from 24, and Recuperator only healing every 3 seconds down from 2 along these effects. Now, they have compensated you, so you're going to be less tanky, less self-supportive, a little bit less CC, but they're buffing your damage. So for Assassination, 14%, 20% auto attack damage, 10% on Envenom, 19% on Crimson Tempest, Venom and Wounds increase. For Outlaw specifically, I think getting some of the biggest ones, all ability damage increased by 21%. I feel like this is probably a good number to go around, having played Outlaw Rogue myself in Shuffle last season to 2400 and testing it on the beta. I feel like his damage is going to be pretty low, especially with less gouges and less kidney shots. But you're getting the 20% auto attack damage, 10% Sinister Strike, 10% pistol shot, 50% initial blade flurry, 8% killing spree, and basically just buffs overall to your damage output, subtlety as well, auto attacks, eviscerate, black powder, secret technique. This was the one that stood out the most to me in most recent updates, aside from videos that I've already covered, because this is just a culmination basically of all of the changes that they've made up to this point with a couple of new additions. So those ones stood out to me the most when I was scrolling through this specifically. But then when we get down to the PvP specific changes, before we get to that, they've nerfed Demon Skin, which is like the passive self-healing from Warlock, which is something that has been really problematic in PvP for a long time. A lot of these just like you exist and you heal yourself type of mechanics. So I think the game is likely going to be really interesting on this next round of testing as a result for that. See buffs for Affliction, Demonology, and Destruction. And when we get down to specifically the PvP changes is where things are going to start getting really interesting. So they've added a Deserter buff that's going to be applied to your account whenever you leave any sort of content like Shuffle or Blitz. Really good for people who are just constantly griefing like that, and I've noticed a lot of it on the beta, so that's really nice. But they've adjusted the 2-set bonus. So now damage dealers are only going to get 5% more stamina down from 15, so 10% overall stamina reduction. They're bringing health pools down, which is absolutely going to be necessary. The game is going to be brutally slow. So this is a really good move on their part to do this preemptively. For healers, they're only going to get 10% stamina down from 20, and they're only going to get 10% primary stat down from 15. So healers are going to have less health and heal a little bit less. Tanks are also now only going to get 5% increased stamina down from 15. Remember, they increased all of our health baselines. So this is probably more so bringing the health back in line with similar to where it would have been in Dragonflight relative, with it being scaled up and such. But this is like a very important thing to pay attention to as far as the overall game pacing, and or if they add healing reduction to something like Battleground Blitz, like in Battleground Blitz, healing is reduced by 20% or something like that. For Death Knight, Necrotic Aura has been removed. They've nerfed a bunch of the absorption effects and stamina bonuses, so Death Knights are feeling that, but that one was already live. As I've said, some of these changes have already come through. That when we were reading through those notes and I didn't understand what the number was, here's what the number was. Frost Fever was doing 137% more damage, and it's not anymore. However, from a few of the games I've watched from Mez this morning playing Death Knight, it seemed like it was doing still all right, even despite the nerfs that have come through for Death Knight. These changes for Demon Hunter are not new. For Druids, a bunch of PvP modifiers being rewound here. Rake damage is no longer reduced by 23% and is no longer reduced by 40% when in stealth combat, so it's just 23 and 40% more damage on Rake. Shred damage bonus from stealth is no longer reduced by 30%, so Incarn shreds are 30% harder. Ferocious Bite is no longer reduced by 25%. Bearform armor is no longer reduced by 20%. Moonkin armor is also no longer reduced by 20%, and rip damage is no longer reduced. So Feral Druid got really strong in this recent build, would be my expectation. For Boomkin, Shooting Star's Astral Power Generation is no longer reduced by 50%, and Umbral Embrace damage is no longer reduced by 40%. Star Surge damage is no longer reduced by 20%. So really big just Druid buffs, it seems like, overall from this point. For Feral Druid, Rampant Ferocity is no longer reduced by 25%. Feral Frenzy is no longer reduced by 14%. Primal Wrath is no longer reduced by 9%. And they fixed an issue with your Ravager. Ravage ability from your hero talents doing 25% less damage, so this seems really good for Druids. For Resto Druid, though, maybe not so much. Mastery Harmony is no longer reduced by 15%, but now it's 80% effective. So it got a 5% nerf on top of it. It was previously 15% nerf. They brought it back to 100% value, then took it down 20%. So I think this is good. I think bringing Resto Druid healing down and making them more about Cyclone would be really good. Some of these damage increasing effects I've already covered in previous videos. For Hunters, Survival of the Fittest, no longer providing an additional 10% damage reduction taken. So obviously Hunters got a big defensive rework in the War Within that I've covered in previous videos. So this is them going in and tailoring those PvP specific changes. So you're probably not going to be as tanky as you are right now, right? So Exhilaration is going to no longer heal for 10% more. Kill Shot is no longer increased by 10%. See, now damage on Hunter I don't see being like a big problem. Binding Shot duration decreased by 1 second in PvP combat. Binding Shot was a problem in PvP? I mean, like, really? That one seems surprising. That one honestly seems really surprising. BM Hunters, you guys were kind of sucking, so let's see what they've done for you. Cobra Shot's going to do 33% more damage. That's starting out good. Bestial Wrath damage is no longer reduced by 20%. This is continuing to be good. Barb Shot is no longer reduced by 7% in PvP. Kill Shot no longer deals 15% increased damage. So Kill Shot double tap nerf here because it was baseline nerfed, and then on the spec it was also nerfed. Multi-Shot no longer deals 15%. You weren't going to press this anyways. Auto Shot no longer deals 15%. So this is a bit strange. Your active abilities are going to be doing a little bit more, but your passive automatic damage is going to be doing a little bit less. For Hunter, for Marksman, Razor Fragment damage bonus to Kill Shot is no longer reduced by 20%. That's a big buff. Explosive Shot is no longer increased, though, by 10%. Kill Shot no longer deals 18% reduced damage. Okay, so what is going on? Kill Shot is going to be doing more damage now because it was buffed by 10, but then it was also reduced by 18, so now it's increased by 8. If I'm doing the math on this right. Multi-Shot, we don't care. Auto attack damage deals 18% reduced damage. For Survival, Serpent Sting no longer deals reduced damage by 17. Raptor Strike no longer 5%. Mongoose Bite is no longer increased by 3. So a little bit of a trade-off here. The barrier nerfs that I talked about literally in my most recent video for Mage in terms of bringing the overall survivability down for them with the new PvP talents introduced for Arcane that we've covered in previous videos as well. For Fire, I'm curious to see what they've done here. Is there anything new? Unleashed Inferno damage bonus to Flame Strike is this is not new. This is literally yesterday. Fire Blast damage is no longer reduced by 8% in PvP, so a little bit more Fire Blast damage. It's good. Flame Patch is no longer increased, though. They've nerfed the crap out of Flame Patch and Flame Strike, so I'm kind of thinking you're not going to be able to do that anymore. Pyroblast is Pyroblast got a 12% nerf too, though. Dragon's Breath damage is no longer increased, as well as Dragon's Breath by 16%. Flame Strike is no longer increased, so Flame Strike got the double dip. The PvP talent 50% nerf, and then this 24% nerf. And Living Bomb is no longer increased by 100%. Ignite is no longer increased by 20%. Are they watching some like pre-patch videos about Fire Mage? Because in the actual beta, Fire Mage is not very good. Okay, so Fire Mage is getting wrecked. That's just what I'm noticing right here. Fire Mage is getting wrecked. Glacial Assault damage increased for Frost Mage is no longer reduced by 50%, so Glacial Assault's do a bit more. Ice Lance damage increased by 75% in PvP, up from 31. That can't be new, right? Because Ice Lance was already hitting so hard. Splitting Ice now causes Ice Lance to strike a secondary target for 20% of his damage. Ooh, you're getting a lot less cleave damage. Glacial Spike damage is no longer decreased in 11% PvP combat. Glacial Spike Mastery is no longer reduced by 40%. So Glacial Spike might actually hit hard now. Ice Nova damage is no longer increased by 8%. So Ice Nova, a bit of a nerf. You still have the proc route from the hero talents is going to be ridiculous. It doesn't look like they've even touched that. Blizzard damage is no longer increased by 9% PvP. It's a Blizzard nerf. And Flurry as well, a little bit of nerf. You're just going to be spamming Ice Lance is what it looks like right now. Clash Effect now has a chance to break on damage. Paralysis is also getting a nerf. Now, I personally hate Paralysis. It's not because it's like super overpowered against me or whatever it is. I don't like CC that is ranged, instant, undispellable. I think that that's a combination for crowd control that is just incredibly tilting because it feels almost completely unpreventable. So I'm not unhappy to see what I consider to be one of the most annoying CCs in the game going down, but it's surprising to see this get nerfed before Cyclone. Just as like a little bit of a funny aside. For Mistweaver specifically, it looks like you're getting reductions in your healing here with the changes that are coming through. So, and Mistweaver is a really good Battleground Blitz healer, but in Arena, it was kind of struggling. So, a bit worried about seeing where that's going to end up. For Windwalker, Rising Sun Kick damage no longer reduced, so a little bit of a buff to Windwalker again. Storm, Earth, and Fire Clones are now immune to all CC, and their movement speed is increased by 20%. That's a big buff to play this ability because previously you got AoE feared, AoE rooted, and then you didn't really do a lot of damage. They are straight up immune to crowd control now. That is crazy. Rising Dragon Sweep's knockup effect has been increased, so the Rising Dragon Punch is going to be getting a bit more of a knockup added to it specifically. Holy Shock's healing is no longer increased. So you're getting nerfs, and then you're getting PvP rewind nerfs as well to Holy Paladin. And Denounce has been buffed, though. Hey, guys, Denounce damage buffed. You guys are back. I don't think so, but it's better than nothing, okay? I'm trying to be positive here for you, Holy Paladins. Justicar's Vengeance heal is no longer reduced by 40% PvP combat. Truce Wake is no longer reduced by 25%. And Searing Light is no longer reduced by 20%. And Divine Storm is no longer reduced. So I think Rhett got a bunch of baseline class nerfs, but PvP rewinds here look pretty decent. Greater heal is significantly less. 40% max health down for 65. But again, it's all that's not the word I want to say. Compensating for the fact that health is just increased in general. The Mind Games buff, here it is officially in an actual legible number, not some weird number we're trying to read off those like weird WoW updates. Absolution Faith also increased by 25%. Pyre Radiance is no longer increased though for Disc, and Purge the Wicked is no longer increased by 15% for Disc. Disc has actually been doing really well in the beta, although it was doing, not so great in the pre-patch. I think it's doing a lot better in the beta, but in Battleground Blitz, the lack of mobility is going to be definitely where it really starts to struggle. Divine Hymn is getting buffed in PvP for Holy. Holy Priest definitely needs some help. I think it's probably the worst healer, I want to say. And then Parameni also a 20% healing increase. Now Gouge is getting a cooldown nerf and a duration nerf. It's going down from 4 to 3. Okay, so it's getting the 25-second cooldown up from 20, and now it's a 3-second duration down from 4. They're nerfing all the instant end cap abilities, which I generally consider some of the most annoying CCs. A lot of people are going to type in the comments right now, you have Cyclone. And it's like, okay, I agree. Cyclone, when you have 60% haste and it's like really unkickable, it's really annoying. But we're going to like 0% haste again. So I don't think you're going to have too big of a problem with it, with that being said. Electrocute getting a big buff for Shaman, 100%. Totem of Wrath now increases critical strike damage and healing by 15, down from 20. That nerf I think we've ever seen. Lava Burst is getting a 20% damage buff. I don't know why that's happening, but you're getting that. Okay. It's for all shamans, so I assume that's Resto and for Ellie. Volcanic Surge now increases lava breath. They nerf Volcanic Surge. I don't think anybody was really going to play that. I was memeing with that. I don't think it's a serious thing. The Season Winds chain we talk about with the Wind Shear Interrupt reducing damage. Healing Stream is getting a bit of a nerf for Resto Shaman. Resto Shaman is really good with the rework that they've done to it, so I'm honestly not surprised to see that come through for PvP specifically. The Warlock changes. Shadow Bolt's getting a 30% buff. Dark Pact is no longer increased, so again the percentage based health abilities on a lot of classes got hit really hard with this update, and we're seeing that in the PvP specific changes as well. Demonic Hellstone is also going to heal for 20%, down from 25%, and Soulburn is only going to buff your Hellstone by 15, down from 20. They're really snipping a lot of these effects. For Soul Swap as a PvP talent, They're going to be reducing the global cooldown of the exhale, so hopefully it's going to be, again, I really want this to just be baked into Rampant Afflictions, because you're never going to not play Soul Swap without Rampant Afflictions. There's no point in Soul Swapping all the instant dots, you know? Like, I really wish that they would combine those together. They're trying to make some quality of life improvements with it baseline, but it's still kind of tough to drop it for how valuable the other ones are. Infirmity is no longer reduced by 50%. Soul Leech damage to absorption conversion is no longer increased. So you're getting a big PvP modifier rewind on this on top of a nerf. So this could be really bad for Warlock survivability. Drain Soul damage is getting buffed by 30% though. Increase the damage to Drain Soul against targets at low health is now 50%. PvP combat was 100. Was Drain Soul that powerful? That needed a 50% nerf there. I guess it's getting an increase at all times for the trade-off of the Execute, but I kind of like the Execute. Cutting of Cruelty is doing 30% more damage. Unstable Affliction damage over time effect is increased by 30%. Big Affliction buffs. Backlash damage 10% buff. Rampant Afflictions now reduces damage of Afflictions, though, by 60, so that's a little bit of a trade-off. Haunt got the massive buff that we talked about in the previous video. Wither is getting a 20% nerf, though. Corruption is getting a 20% nerf, and Agony, but you got a bunch of buffs on top, so a lot of this is kind of like not going to be too big of a deal, I think, for Warlock specifically. Duration on dots, we've covered that in the previous video. For Demonology, Pact of Iridon's Doom Bolt is no longer reduced by 60%. I don't know. Is this the Doom Guard? He's going to be doing a lot more damage. I think that's what that is. Demonic Strength is now reduced by 25%, not 50. So there's a big buff to Demonology pet damage. Dreadbite, though, is no longer increased by 10%, and Demon Bolt is no longer increased by 20. But remember, Warlock all got damage buffs on baseline class, so that's all going to trade off. Conflagrate damage is no longer reduced. Bro, what? All the Destro Lock abilities all got buffed on the top side for PvE, so this is like you're getting even more. Incinerate increased by 10%. Immolate increased not by 9, but Shadowburn is not getting 10% buff. I think you got like 150% or something. It's too far off to scroll, but I'm pretty sure it was 100% or higher. Thunderous Roar no longer reduced by 7%, so some buffs for Warrior here. Shockwave is no longer increased, though, the damage. Armor to the Teeth is no longer increased by 45%. Is it because they increased the armor on the gear? Because that's going to have huge scaling issues possibly for Warrior. Impending Victory nerf, I think we covered in a previous video. So again, self-healing. And Shockwave duration is no longer increased by 1 second. So some CC reductions here on these abilities. Really surprised they didn't target Ice Nova DRing itself or something to do with Ice Nova, because I feel like Ice Nova proccing is the most obnoxious thing at the moment. Arms Warrior damage is no longer decreased by 13%, so 13% buff. Auto attack damage 15% buff. Fueled by Violence 17% buff. Deep Wounds 13% buff. Cleave damage 9% buff. You're never going to press that. Overpowered damage nerf 10% nerf. Execute damage 20% nerf. Test of Might's effectiveness is no longer decreased, though, by 50%. So I think this is your burst cooldown with Warbreaker, if I'm not mistaken. Bloodletting's effectiveness no longer decreased by 50%. Dreadnought damage no longer increased. So overpowered nerfs, but everything else seemingly getting buffed. And Execute nerf, I should say. Bloodbath is no longer reduced by 20%. Big buffs for Fury. I don't even know if Fury needed this. Fury was doing really good damage. Whirlwind cleave damage no longer reduced by 9%. Bloodthirst increased by 6 has been taken away, so 6% nerf. Dancing Blade's auto attack speed and damage increase is no longer decreased by 50% PvP. Raging Blow is no longer increased by 30%. So, okay, there's a little bit of a trade-off in damage here. And then some changes for Prot as well, specifically, or that I think we've already covered in previous videos. So this was a big update. This was a big update. We're going to really need to see how this plays out on the beta. I have my stream linked in the description down below if you'd like to follow along with that live testing. And as always, I will continue to provide these updates here as I see them so you can continue to enhance your experience with World of Warcraft. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one.